So this week we'll be studying the parsha of Pinchas. At this point, the Jewish people have traveled in the desert for 40 years, and they are poised to enter Eretz Yisrael. So first, there is a census that is taken of all of the people who are now alive, as the generation that left Mitzrayim years earlier have all died out, except for Kalev and Yehoshua. And now there is a census, because as they're about to enter the land of Israel, they will now apportion to each person and each tribe a section, which is their inheritance in Eretz Yisrael. And in this week's parsha, we learn about that process, which was done through a combination of means. There was a gorel, Ruach HaKodesh, a divine inspiration, and based on the demographics of every shevet, every tribe, which some were larger, some were smaller, they were allotted their portion in Eretz Yisrael. And at this point, a very interesting episode takes place. There were the 5 daughters of Tzalafchad, who Tzalafchad had passed away many years earlier. So these daughters were orphaned. Now, the way the land and the inheritance worked out, it was only given 2 male heirs, which that is a separate discussion why that took place, and largely had to do with the fact that to maintain the tribal integrity, the land would have to be transferred specifically to the males, because when a woman, if they would acquire the land and get married, so the land would then be transferred to the other shevet, the other tribe. So to protect the integrity of the land and the association with each tribe on their allotted land, initially the rules, the system of inheritance was specifically to the male heirs. Now these daughters approach Moshe Rabbeinu and Elazar, and they say the following: "Our father has died in the desert, and he was not from those who were from the complainers, those who rebelled against Hashem, Korach and his entire mutiny, because he died of his own private sin. So therefore, why should our father lose out his name in the family?" This is roughly paraphrasing what they told Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, they were saying, since Tzalafchad, our father, has died and leaving no male sons, we, according to these rules, cannot inherit the land, and therefore he will lose out, his name will be missing from the family. According to some, the daughters of Tzalafchad either didn't get married. Now, if they didn't have a claim, because their husbands would have land, and therefore they would be able to live with them. But now that there's no male in the picture, not a father, not a husband, so now where are they going to live? They have no prospects. So their claim was, something has to be done. The system has to be tweaked. And some even say that the daughters of Tzalafchad didn't get married, specifically because they wanted to honor the name of their father, and it was only if they were not married they could actually stake this claim. Because, as we mentioned, if they were married, then they would just live in the portion of land that their husband inherited. So they come to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu immediately defers to Hashem. It says Moshe Rabbeinu presented their claim to Hashem. And in the aftermath of this claim, Hashem actually affirmed their case, and he says, true, that the daughters of Tzlafchad are claiming there's actually some merit to their case, and therefore the rules will accommodate that if there's a case where there is no male heirs in the family, then daughters will take the place and they will indeed inherit the land. This is roughly the story, and it bears some explanation on several levels. Number one, this that the daughters of Tzlafchad did was quite bold, quite brazen. Most people, perhaps they hear this is the case, this is the law. Hashem says that the land only is inherited to the sons. That's it. You take it. This is the fact. This is the status quo, and you just go along with it. Most people will do that. Somehow, they were able to work up the brazen and it would seem perhaps insolent chutzpah to come and challenge Hashem's system. This is not something that some mere mortal made up. This is what Hashem decided. This is how the system of inheritance works. And yet, they decided to challenge that, to contest that. Where did that come from? And was there any merit to that? Because the real question is, what exactly was their case? Seemingly, their claim doesn't lack any merit. Because, as we mentioned before, there was a special census that was taken at the end of 40 years after the entire previous generation died out. And it was based on this census, these people, the new generation who are entering Eretz Yisrael, they merited to inherit a section, a portion in Eretz Yisrael. So seemingly their whole case is, our father, he left Mitzrayim, our father was from the earlier generations, and he has no sons, and therefore we should take his portion. But seemingly, even if Tzlafchad did have a son, seemingly there would be no inheritance, because at the end of the day, whoever enters Eretz Yisrael, they get it. But Tzlafchad, he did not merit to have a portion in Eretz Yisrael. So if so, what is their case? Now the truth is, there's a debate in the Talmud and Baba Basra as to exactly how it worked. Some say that it was the generation that left Egypt. They were the ones. It was determined on that, and based on that generation, those people inherited the land. But there's another opinion that says no. Another opinion says it was the generation that entered Israel. It was that generation who inherited the land. And Rashi sort of seems to be sensitive to this, because he takes the verse which presents the claim of the daughters of Tzlafchad, and he tries to parse and tries to figure out exactly what was their claim, because it's a bit cryptic. The entire pasuk, they say like this. They say, our father died in the desert. Then they start saying that he wasn't part of the complainers, he wasn't part of the mutiny of Korach, he died because of his own private sin. So it seems they're saying a few things. Number one, that he died of an unrelated sin, but they start injecting these other aspects that seem to have no relevance. That he wasn't part of Korach. What were they getting at? What is the relevance if they were part of Korach, if they're part of the complainers, that he died in the desert? Why is all that relevant to their claim? Their claim is simply this. Their claim is, our father had a portion in the land of Israel. There's no sons, and we should get it. What does Korach have to do with it? What does the complainers? What about his private sin? What does that have to do with anything? And then another question, and then Rashi actually answers, he adds another interesting point, and he says there's a debate between two of our sages about the precise nature of the sin as to why Tzlafchad died. There's the sage Rabbi Akiva. He says because he was from the wood gatherer. He was the wood gatherer, the Makoshesh Eitzim. Back many, many years earlier, even before the giving of the Torah, when the Jews received the mitzvah of Shabbos in Mara, there was an individual who went out and gathered wood. and that person was put to death because that was a violation, a desecration of the Shabbos. There's a second opinion, Rabbi Shimon, he says no. Tzlafcha died on the account of the fact he was from the Mafilim, from the defiant ones. After the story of the Meraglim, where the entire generation was banned from entering Eretz Yisrael, there was a group of people who decided they felt bad about the whole thing, and they had remorse, they had regret, and they banded together to enter Eretz Yisrael. But it was a mission that ended in an abject disaster, catastrophe. No one made it out. So there's a debate. What's the relevance, what his sin was? Why does Rashi bring it? How does that shed any light? How does that enhance the case of the daughters of Tzlafchad as to what the precise nature of the sin was? And then there's the question, as we mentioned, after they present the case to Moshe Rabbeinu, he does not even seem to deliberate. He does not even give any of his own suggestions. He immediately flips their case over to Hashem. Which, the question is, why? Moshe Rabbeinu has been their teacher for 40 years. He knew the whole Torah. He knew everything. Why doesn't he give his opinion? Surely he knows, based on the methods of hermeneutics and extrapolation, and perhaps maybe he even knew the case outright. Why does he not give an answer to them? He passes it on to Hashem. Some say Moshe Rabbeinu did not know the answer. For some, and others give other explanations, but it still bears clarification. So on this last point, there is a fascinating insight that is brought down. The Rebbe touched upon it, and that is because, as we mentioned, part of their claim was, they said that our father was not part of the mutiny, the congregation of Korach. And mentioning this aspect had a very, very profound impact on Moshe Rabbeinu. Because as soon as he heard that they were saying, we weren't on the wrong team, we were on your side, Moshe Rabbeinu recoiled from even in any way engaging in this case. He felt that somehow there was a taint, somehow there was a bias in this case. Which means that as soon as they said, Moshe Rabbeinu, we were with you, we weren't against you in that crucial battle over your legitimacy, we weren't with the opposing side, right away Moshe Rabbeinu sensed that his objectivity right now has been compromised. His integrity in this case can no longer be counted on. Why is that? How could that be? Moshe Rabbeinu, this is a story that happened many, many years ago, over 39 years ago. And yet Moshe Rabbeinu feels he's no longer qualified to adjudicate this case. There was, many years ago, in Krakow, a famous rabbi, his name is Rabbi Yoshua Katz, who authored various Sfarim, famously the Drisha, the Prisha, Me'iras Anayim. These are commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch and the Tur. And he was once, when he printed one of his Sfarim, one of his books, he got into a disagreement with his printer about compensation. So they decided they would take it to a din Torah, to a bezdin. But the printer said, we can't do it here in Poland. You're too famous, too well-known, and I don't think I'm going to get a fair shake in this city or even in this country. So they decided to go to a different country. They went to Hungary, and there was a young rabbi, and they both presented their case. After both sides each one presented their claim, this rabbi sided with the printer against this Rabbi Katz. And as is the right of every defendant or claimant, he said, explain to me, what is the source for your decision? He said, well, as it happens, there's very fascinating commentary book that was just recently printed in the country of Poland. It's known as the Sefer Me'iras Anayim, the Sma. And right there, he brings up a very, very similar case, and he gives the psak, he gives the decision the way I just decided right now. When this Rabbi Katz heard this, he was totally shaken up. He says, wow, this shows the extent how a person's bias and objectivity runs so deep that here I wrote that book, and I toiled over that commentary on this very subject, and yet what I myself had written and decided and paskined in that case, I couldn't even remember that. It didn't even entertain. I wasn't even able to entertain that. This shows how a person, no matter how great, how saintly, how righteous, when it comes to matters that are relevant to you, you lose all sense of objectivity. There was once a person who came to the Rebbe and complained about a certain rabbi who, for whatever reason, it seemed that he was more preoccupied with his personal interests than the needs of his community. And the Rebbe said, with a smile, that you shouldn't get so fazed. We find an interesting passage in the Talmud that discusses when the high court would deliberate every single year after the winter whether to add an additional month in Adar, what we know as the Shana Mu'beres, the impregnated year when we add the extra month. And there were various considerations as to why they would do it. Sometimes the roads after the winter were quite muddy and they couldn't be passed. They would wait another month. They would add the extra month. So Pesach, when people would want to come up to Eretz Yisrael and the pilgrimage, they would have roads that were more accommodating. There were other considerations. But the Talmud says that there are two people that cannot be part of that deliberation. And that is the king and the Kohen Gadol. And the Talmud explains the king couldn't be part of that deliberation because he has a vested interest. What's his angle? Well, the king would have to pay the wages for his army on an annual basis, and therefore, if he has a year where an extra month is added, he gains, because whether it's a year of 12 months or 13 months, he's going to pay the same salary. So for him, an extra month is beneficial. That's his consideration. A Kohen Gadol, it's the opposite. He would like a shorter year because he goes on Yom Kippur into the mikveh many times throughout the day. He walks on cold marble floor. And if the year has an extra month, then Yom Kippur will come a month later, closer or deeper into the winter, and the water that he goes into in the mikveh on Yom Kippur will be colder. So it's in his interests to have the year shorter, not longer. So the Rebbe says, here we're talking about the Kohen Gadol, the holiest of holy on Yom Kippur. What would his consideration be, that he would have a warm mikveh? But yet, maybe this is not a conscious decision, maybe it's a subconscious decision. We see how every single person in any situation, it's very, very hard to maintain their objectivity and their honesty in any situation. And the Rebbe spoke how, therefore, every person needs to appoint a mentor, a guide in any decision that they have, because when you have an important decision to make in life, you have to make sure that someone who has no vested interest, no individual considerations to decide whether something is important or not. So therefore, in this case, Moshe Rabbeinu, even though this was when they mentioned that we were not part of rebellion, even though Hashem validated Moshe Rabbeinu, he was such a great person, he was such a humble person, yet as soon as they said that, Moshe Rabbeinu right away decided he has to withdraw himself from these considerations, from these deliberations. So that's why Moshe Rabbeinu handed over their case to Hashem. But we need to understand, what was their case? As we mentioned before, seemingly the father had no merits, had no claims on any land. And the other question is, why did they feel they should take on a divinely ordained law and rule in the system of inheritance? So the Rebbe explained that the truth is, many, many years earlier, when the Jewish people were still in Mitzrayim, Hashem made a promise. Told the Bnei Yisrael through Moshe Rabbeinu that I will take you out of this land. Votzeiti eschem, vitzalti eschem. As we know, the famous 4 terms of redemption. Hashem promised them that He would liberate them from the bondage of Egypt. Veheveti eschem, I will bring you to the land of Israel. V'nasati lachem morasha, and I will give you an inheritance. In other words, many, many years earlier, there was a special promise. There was a covenant that every single Jew would inherit the land of Israel. And this promise was something that every Jew knew about, and they knew they could count on. Many, many years later, these daughters of Tzlafchad still remembered that promise. And they wanted to make good on it. Now what happened was, initially every single Jew that left Egypt was assured, was guaranteed, that they would have a chelik, they would have a portion, a place that was truly theirs in Eretz Yisrael. What happened was, when the Meraglim, when the spies came back and they gave a negative report regarding Eretz Yisrael, the Jewish people all began to cry and scream and holler, and they said, we don't want to go to Israel. It's a place that will consume us. It will gobble us up. This is not something that we want. They spurned that special promise that Hashem guaranteed to every single Jew. And indeed, Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, I have decided to revoke that promise. I am withdrawing that pledge that I made that every Jew who left Mitzrayim will receive the land. However, Hashem said, I'm not completely withdrawing that inheritance. What I will do is, I will give it over to their children. The next generation, they will, upon entering Eretz Yisrael, each and every one of them, they will get a chelik in Eretz Yisrael. However, it is determined, and we see from here, that even though the next generation got a chelik in Eretz Yisrael, they only got it because their parents had their original haftacha, their initial assurance, the initial promise. So even though their parents could not, because of their actions, because as a consequence of what they did, they could not receive their portion in Eretz Yisrael, it was transferred over to the children. But the children got it because of their parents. Now, years later, the daughters of Tzlafchad step up and they say the following. Our father, he died in the desert. Why is that relevant? Because that means he was one of those who left Mitzrayim. That means he was from those to who Hashem guaranteed and promised that he would receive a portion. He would receive a nachala. Now you're going to say, okay, so did the other 600,000 people who left, they also got the same promise. But they forfeited their chance. So here they add and say, no. Our father was different than everybody else because his sin was different. He was not from the complainers. He was not from those who said, we don't want the land of milk and honey. He was not from those which happened in the aftermath of the story of the Meraglim. He was not from those who banded together with Korach and challenged Moshe's legitimacy, which at that point, they also mocked the promise of entering Eretz Yisrael. So if that is the case, Tzlafchad, being that he was one of those who were in Mitzrayim who received the promise, but was not part of the subsequent sins that caused the forfeiture of their portion in Eretz Yisrael, so therefore, the initial promise should remain standing. He should still have access to his nachala, to his portion in the land of Israel. However, even though they said that our father was not from the complainers, he was not part of Korach and his mutineers, there's still a question: what was the nature of their sin, of Tzlafcha's sin? Why did he die? And it's important because perhaps maybe he didn't sin with the aforementioned sins of Korach or the complainers, but maybe his sin was so egregious or so severe that he would forfeit his portion in Eretz Yisrael. So the daughters of Tzlafchad were in a bind. On the one hand, they can't divulge the nature of the sin of their father because that would be disrespectful. On the other hand, if they don't say anything, then Moshe, how could they need to bolster their argument? What is their case? Perhaps their father's sin, they're saying, well, he had a portion, he had a guarantee. Maybe he did something in his life, just like the Meraglim, just like the entire generation. They lost out on their portion and was transferred over to their children. So too, maybe Tzlafcha did something like that, of that nature. So therefore, they spoke in a very vague way. Something very ambiguous. They said, Bechet Omes, he died because of his sin. It wasn't a sin that was related to others. He didn't cause others to sin. It was his own private sin. And yet, Rashi says, we need to dig a little deeper. We need to find out exactly what did he do. Because we need to really know what was their argument. What was his sin? So here we have two opinions. The opinion of Rabbi Akiva says like this. The father of these daughters, Tzlafchad, he died because he was the Makoshish Eitzim. He was the one who was gathering the sticks. This was a sin that happened many years, even before the Meraglim, before the decree, before the withdrawal and the revocation of the promise of the Nachala for every single one. So he certainly did not lose it out, because this happened even before the giving of the Torah. This was many, many years earlier. Further, as many commentators say, what was the nature of this sin? What happened was, there was a new mitzvah called Shabbos. Many people were lax and not committed to the observance of Shabbos. And Tzlafchad, he felt he had to make a statement. He had to prove that failure to adhere strictly and scrupulously to every aspect of the laws of Shabbos would carry a very, very grave consequence. Therefore, he decided to violate the Shabbos, to demonstrate, and as ultimately he was put to death, he wanted to demonstrate the severity of Shabbos. So ultimately, it was ironically through the violation of Shabbos that was ultimately the ultimate affirmation and the display that Shabbos is a very, very important day and is not to be trifled with. So based on this basis, according to many, Tzlafchad was actually acting in a very noble, selfless, and ulterior way. His motives in the sense that he didn't want to violate Shabbos in a vindictive or in a rebellious way. Rather, he was trying to make a point for the benefit of his fellow brethren. The other opinion, by contrast, Rabbi Shimon says something. He takes a step further. He says that Tzlafchad died on the account that he was from the defiant ones, which this actually bolsters the case of the daughters of Tzlafchad even more so, because they said, our father wasn't just a lover of the Jewish people; he was a lover of the land of Israel. In the aftermath of all of this, of the story of the spies, where all of those people who left Israel, who left Egypt, who forfeited their portion in Eretz Yisrael, there was a group of people that decided to rectify. They wanted to make amends, and they banded together, even though it wasn't sanctioned. They tried to storm Eretz Yisrael. It ended in catastrophe. It ended in tragedy. But that displayed their love and their affection and their yearning and desire to go into Eretz Yisrael. So from here, the daughters of Tzlachad said, not only did our father not sin in a way that would diminish his status, if he was from the Mafilim, if he was from the defiant ones, this shows how much more his connection is to Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, when Moshe Rabbeinu heard this, he said, wow, I need to present this to Hashem. And ultimately, this was affirmed. So we see from here that the daughters of Tzlachad always knew that when Hashem makes a promise, when he makes a guarantee, it could be many, many years that have transpired. But that did not diminish the potency, the depth of the promise that Hashem gave. They tell the story that there was this fellow who was an innkeeper, and he had his good years when he was very successful, but he came upon hard times as his inn was no longer at a critical crossroads where many people would pass by and frequent his inn. He was, from day to day, his fortunes were dwindling. He had to start selling off his assets. And where was once an affluent, proud man, now had mamish nothing left in his home. It came to a point he didn't even have enough money to buy his basic groceries. Milk, his bread. So he looks around to see what else he could get rid of. And in his home, goes outside, he sees an old dusty toolbox. And when he opens it up, he sees in it a crumpled, yellowed envelope. And when he sees that, he's shocked. And he says, "Oi, this is probably the source of all my misery and suffering." As he recalled, it was some 16 years earlier, the Baal Shem Tov had passed by his inn. At that time, he was in his heyday. He was rich, he was successful, and he treated the Baal Shem Tov very well, the hospitality. And at the end of the stay, the Baal Shem Tov asked him to bring him a quill, some ink, and he wrote down something on a piece of paper and he puts it in an envelope and he says, "Please, I need you to deliver this to somebody." And he says, sure, he takes the envelope, but he must have been busy with some chores and he absentmindedly put the envelope down in his toolbox and he completely forgot about his task, his mission that the Baal Shem Tov had given him to deliver this note. And now it's 16 years later, and he stumbles upon this, and he realizes, "Oh, I never delivered this letter." So he takes the letter right away, and he knows he has to go to a certain city. He travels there right away, and when he gets there, he comes to some of the leaders of the city and says, "Please, I see this letter is addressed to this and this person. Where do I go?" They say, "Wow, are you a prophet? How did you know?" He says, What did I know? What do I know? He says, "Well, it happens to be punk today that these people that this letter is addressed to were appointed as the leaders of the community." And he brings the paper, they point him where to go, and he goes and he delivers this letter. And in it, the letter, it says, "Please, the person who is delivering to you this letter has come upon very difficult and troubling times. Please assist this man in any way you are able to." So already many, many years earlier, it was Bashert. This is how it had to be. Baal Shem Tov had that letter for him in the right place, in the right time. And here in this story, it may have been hundreds of years where Hashem gave the Haftacha, he gave the assurance and the promise, the pledge that every Jew will have their nachla, their chilek in Eretz Yisrael. And it was this hope and this dream that the daughters of Tzlachad did not want to give up on. And they believed in it to the extent that they're willing to fight for it. Which this is a fascinating thing. As we mentioned before, why did the daughters of Tzlachad, why did they feel they should challenge the status quo? Why should they take on a decree, a law. It's not something that Moshe Rabbeinu made up, the elders, Aaron. It was something that Hashem decided. You're going to go and tell Hashem he should run his system differently? Where did they get that? What's interesting, the Rebbe once explained in the wording that the daughters of Tzlavchad used, they said, Lama Yigara, why should our father's name be excluded, be missing from the name of the family by losing his portion in Eretz Yisrael? We find it's a very interesting term, and we find that in a previous occasion, where this word Yigara is used in a similar way. We go back to the Parsha of Bahaloscha, and it's in the year when the Jewish people offer the Karban Pesach, which had to be done in a state of ritual purity, and there were several individuals who were unable to bring the sacrifice. They were ritually impure. They were carrying the remains of Yosef, and they were unable to offer the sacrifice. And they come up to Moshe Rabbeinu and they say, Lama Nigara, similar to the term used in this week's Parsha, Lama Yigara. Why should we be excluded? Why should we lose out? We were unable to offer the Paschal offering, the Karban Pesach. It's not fair. What does Moshe Rabbeinu says? Let's see. Let's bring it up to Hashem. Which on the face of it, it makes no sense. And indeed, in the end, Hashem, he validated that question, and he said, we are offering a new opportunity. And there was Pesach Sheni, a month later, the 14th of Iyar, to bring the Karban Pesach. Which on the face of it, it's hard to understand. What was their claim? What were they saying? It's not fair. We couldn't bring the Karban Pesach because we were ritually impure. Imagine someone says, I couldn't keep the Shabbos, it's not fair, let me do it on Wednesday. If you lose out, you lose out. Where were they coming from? But what the Rebbe explains is that ultimately, because of these people's determination, they felt they wanted to come closer to Hashem. They felt that there was something lacking in their life. It is precisely because they took a stand. And they said, we are not going to settle with anything less. We have an excuse. We could explain why we didn't bring the Karban Pesach. There was a certain circumstance, a situation beyond our control, which did not allow us to do it. We had every excuse in the book. But they did not opt to use that avenue, that option. They said, no, we want to have the opportunity to bring the Karban Pesach. And it is as a result of that determination, because of that outpour of yearning to come closer to Hashem, to do that much more, a new mitzvah was invented. A new mitzvah was created. Something that if they didn't say anything, it wouldn't have happened. And the Rebbe explains that we see from here that if they weren't bothered by the fact that they were not going to bring Karban Pesach, sometimes people, we miss a minyan, we miss out on a certain mitzvah, and we say, oh, shoot, it's too bad. Nebuch, we missed it. We'll get it next time. If they weren't bothered by it, nothing would have happened. There would have been no Karban Pesach. There would be no Pesach Sheni. That whole thing wouldn't exist. It was because they dug in their heels and they say, we will not allow this opportunity to pass up. And because of their determination, not willing to settle with the status quo, they were able to open a new passageway, to create a new opportunity that till that point didn't exist. And the same thing happened in this story. The daughters of Tzlavchad could have resigned themselves to their fate. And they said, listen, our father didn't have any boys. There were no male sons. This is the system we live in. Deal with it. We'll go along with it. And many people do that. In life, when a certain situation, they say, our hands are tied. We can't do anything. This is the system. This is the way it works. This is the class we are in. This is the circumstance we were born in. And there's nothing we can do about it. They said, no, we are going to fight. And it is that gesture, it is that feeling that they wanted to come closer to Eretz Yisrael because of their love for the land. They were able to shake up and create a structural, systemic change in the laws of inheritance. They tell the story of this couple. It's brought in the Midrash. Couple who were married for many years, they didn't have any children. And as 10 years went by and they were contemplating the divorce, they came to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and asked them for his advice. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, listen, if you guys are contemplating your divorce, so I have a suggestion. The same way you guys came together, you two came together with food and drink at your wedding, so too your separation should happen with food and drink. Make a party. So they made a whole party, and the husband, he imbibed on a substantial amount of alcohol, and in that state he tells his wife, listen, my dear, please, you have the opportunity, you could take any one object that you want, take it with you to the house of your parents. And so she instructed the servants over there to carry her husband and bring him to her parents' house. The next morning he wakes up from his drunken stupor and he looks around and he recognizes he's on the couch of his in-laws. And he says to his wife, what am I doing here? She says, well, you told me to take an object that I want, that I desire, and bring it to my parents' home. Well, there is no object that is more precious to me than you. When he heard this, they decided to go back to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai again. And when they came to him, he davened for them, and they were blessed with children. This is the story. And many ask exactly what the whole story from beginning to end, what was the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's plot, his game plan? What's this dancing and partying before they divorced? What was that? And also, if Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was going to pray for them, and through that prayer it seems that they had children, why didn't he do it at the outset? Why did he go through the whole spiel, dance and play together, and then come back, and then he's going to pray for them? And one of the explanations is that it wasn't the prayer of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai that blessed them with children. What happened was he saw in the marriage there was something lacking in their connection. He saw in the heavens that the decree was sealed. But through this whole process, which ultimately culminated in the wife saying, there is nothing more precious to you than me, she was able to break up the status quo. She was able to reach beyond the parameters of their relationship to a deeper dimension. So ultimately, once she was able to unseal that decree, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was able, through his prayers, to bring that to manifestation. And this is a very, very important lesson for each and every one of us, because today we encounter many, many challenges, many, many things that seem to tell us that we have to stay in our lane. We should not try to undermine the norms and conventions of society. And the big question, Mashiach. A whole day we are told we should anticipate Mashiach, we should pray for Mashiach, we should bang down the doors of gates of heaven that Mashiach should come. And you could ask, why are we making Hashem crazy? Hashem knows when Mashiach has to come. He is not going to come a moment sooner than he's supposed to. So what are we doing with this whole thing? What are we trying to accomplish? And the truth is, the fact that Mashiach is not here is not just because Hashem doesn't want it to happen. We see from the story, from the daughters of Tzlafchad, that sometimes something doesn't happen because we didn't do anything about it. Imagine if the daughters of Tzlafchad didn't say a word. They didn't advocate. They didn't storm the courthouse of Moshe Rabbeinu and demand a change. How the Rebbe would often tell us that it's all up to us. If Mashiach is not here, it's because it doesn't bother us enough. It's because we don't make it a priority to change the status quo. And it is only when someone is disturbed, like the people who didn't offer the Karban Pesach at the first time around, like the daughters of Tzlafchad who were not satisfied, they were frustrated with their condition, and they demanded a change. Each and every one of us, we are all frustrated, but it is when we take a stand and demand that Hashem ultimately bring Mashiach, so may it be Hashem's will, that each and every one of us, we are long frustrated with the gullus that we are in. May He very, very soon liberate each and every one of us, and may we get our nachala. There's a special inheritance for every single Jew. Every single Jew has their Dalet Amos, their special space in Eretz Yisrael, which we will very, very soon, each and every one of us, find ourselves in our place with Mashiach Tzidkenu very, very soon. B'mher v'yameinu, amen.